The stagecoach rattled to a stop outside the Rawhide, Nevada saloon, just as the summer sun began its descent behind the dusty mountain peaks, and Violet Sutton stepped down with one hand pressed protectively against her swollen belly, and the other clutching a worn leather satchel that held everything she owned in this world. The year was 1877, and she had traveled 3 weeks from St. Louis to reach this God-forsaken patch of desert, running from a past that threatened to destroy her future and the innocent life growing inside her. She had barely taken 2 steps toward the boarding house across the street when a tall figure emerged from the saloon's shadow. Xavier Cross was the kind of man who commanded attention without trying, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. He was 26 years old and owned the largest cattle ranch within 50 miles, though most folks in Rawhide knew him better for his quick draw and quicker temper when it came to defending what was his. "You need help with that bag, miss." His voice was deep and rough, like gravel tumbling down a mountainside. Violet looked up at him, her green eyes weary but defiant. At 23, she had learned not to trust handsome cowboys with easy smiles, but there was something different about this one, something solid. "I can manage, thank you." Xavier noticed the way she held herself, the protective curve of her spine, the visible swell beneath her traveling dress. Most men in town would have looked away, made their judgments, and moved on. But Xavier had always been cursed with an inability to ignore someone who needed help, even when they claimed otherwise. "Boarding house is full up," he said, not unkindly. "Fire last week took out half the rooms. Mrs. Henderson is putting folks up in the church basement until repairs are done." Violet felt her knees weaken. She had counted on that boarding house, had saved every penny to afford 2 months' rent while she figured out her next move. The church basement meant questions, meant the preacher's wife with her pursed lips and judgment written across her face like scripture. "I see." She straightened her shoulders, refusing to let this stranger see her panic. "Thank you for the information." She started walking, though she had no idea where she was going. The main street of Rawhide stretched before her, a collection of wooden buildings that seemed to shimmer in the heat. A general store, a bank, the saloon, a blacksmith shop with its forge glowing orange in the gathering dusk. Beyond that, the desert stretched endlessly, unforgiving and beautiful in equal measure. Xavier watched her take 3 more steps before he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. "I have a house. Big enough for 10 people, though it's just me and my foreman rattling around in it. You could stay there." Violet stopped walking. She turned slowly, her expression carefully neutral even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "I don't think that would be appropriate, Mr. Cross." Xavier Cross. He removed his hat, revealing sweat-darkened hair. "And you're right, it wouldn't be appropriate if I was suggesting something improper, but I'm offering a room, meals, and safety until you get on your feet. My foreman's wife lives there too, cooks and keeps house. You'd have propriety and protection both." She wanted to refuse. Every instinct told her to keep her distance, to rely on no one, to protect herself and her baby from the complications that came with accepting help from strangers. But the baby kicked hard against her ribs, and she was so desperately tired, and something in Xavier Cross's gray eyes told her he was a man who kept his word. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Xavier settled his hat back on his head. "Don't need to know you to see you need help. Besides, my mother would rise from her grave and haunt me if I let a woman in your condition sleep in a church basement." Despite everything, Violet felt the corner of her mouth twitch. "Well, we cannot have that." "No, madam, we cannot." That was how Violet Sutton found herself seated in Xavier Cross's wagon 20 minutes later, her bag stowed behind the bench seat, rolling out of town toward his ranch. The Circle X spread across 5,000 acres of Nevada rangeland, carved out of wilderness by Xavier's father and expanded by Xavier himself over the past 5 years. The house came into view as they crested a low rise, a sturdy 2-story structure built from lumber hauled all the way from California, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides and real glass windows that caught the last rays of sunlight. "It's beautiful," Violet said, and meant it. Xavier felt an unexpected warmth spread through his chest at her words. He had built this house with his own hands, along with his crew, dreaming of the day he would fill it with a family. But at 26, he was still unmarried, still searching for a woman who could love this harsh land as much as he did. Maria Cross, his foreman's wife, met them at the door. She was a round Mexican woman in her 40s with kind eyes and flour on her apron. Her husband, Robert, stood behind her, a grizzled cowboy who had worked for Xavier's father and stayed on after the old man died. They both took in Violet's condition with a single glance, but Maria's face softened immediately. "Pobrecita," she murmured, ushering Violet inside. "Come, come. You must be exhausted. Robert, bring her bag. Xavier, stop standing there like a fence post and get this girl some water." Violet found herself swept into the house's cool interior, installed in a chair at the large kitchen table, and presented with a glass of cool water and a plate of still warm cornbread within minutes. Maria bustled around her, talking in a mixture of English and Spanish, while Xavier and Robert disappeared to handle evening chores. For the first time in months, Violet felt something that might have been safety. She stayed in that kitchen long enough to eat 2 pieces of cornbread with butter and honey, to drink 3 glasses of water, and to answer Maria's gentle questions with carefully edited versions of the truth. Yes, she had come from St. Louis. No, the baby's father was not in the picture. No, she had no family waiting for her anywhere. Yes, she was grateful for the help. What she did not say was that the baby's father was a wealthy merchant's son who had promised her marriage, gotten her with child, and then laughed in her face when she told him about the pregnancy. She did not mention that his family had threatened her, paid her to leave town, made it clear that if she ever spoke his name in connection with her bastard child, they would ruin her completely. She did not explain that she had taken their money because she needed it to survive, but that every penny felt like poison in her pocket. Maria showed her to a bedroom on the 2nd floor, a simple room with a brass bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the ranch yard. Violet sank onto the bed after Maria left and finally let herself cry, great silent sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for her lost innocence, for her ruined reputation, for the baby who would grow up without a father. She cried until she had no tears left, and then she lay down on top of the quilt and fell into the deepest sleep she had known in months. Downstairs, Xavier sat on the porch with Robert, smoking and watching the stars emerge one by one across the vast Nevada sky. "You sure about this, boss?" Robert asked, his voice carefully neutral. "No," Xavier admitted, "but it felt like the right thing to do. Maria likes her already. Says she has good eyes, honest eyes." Xavier thought about those green eyes, weary and defiant and desperate all at once. She is running from something. Most folks who come out here are running from something. You included. That was true enough. Xavier had left Virginia after the war, unable to return to a plantation system built on the backs of enslaved people, unable to reconcile the life his family expected with the man he wanted to be. He had come west with nothing but a horse and a bedroll, and he had built everything he had through sweat and determination. "How far along do you think she is?" Xavier asked. 6 months, maybe 7. Baby will come before winter, I would wager. Xavier tried to imagine this house with a baby in it, with the sound of crying in the middle of the night and tiny clothes hanging on the wash line. The image was surprisingly appealing. "We will keep her safe," he said, and it sounded like a vow. Robert nodded slowly. "Reckon we will." Violet woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through her window and the sound of men's voices in the yard below. For a moment, she forgot where she was, and panic seized her chest. Then memory returned, and with it, a cautious relief. She rose carefully, her back aching from the baby's weight, and made her way downstairs. Maria was already in the kitchen, making breakfast for the ranch hands. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the air, and Violet's stomach growled loudly. "Buenos dias," Maria said cheerfully. "You slept like the dead. This is good. Your body needed rest. Sit, eat." Violet sat. She was learning that arguing with Maria was futile. A plate appeared in front of her loaded with eggs, bacon, fried potatoes, and thick slices of bread. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, while Maria kept up a steady stream of conversation that required little response. Xavier came in as she was finishing, his shirt already dusty from morning work. He stopped when he saw her, and something crossed his face too quickly for her to read. "Morning," he said. "Good morning. Thank you again for your hospitality." "You are welcome." He poured himself coffee, leaning against the counter. "I was thinking you might want to come into town with me later. Figure you will need some things. Supplies, maybe fabric for making baby clothes." "Whatever you need." Violet stiffened. "I cannot accept charity, Mr. Cross, Xavier. And it is not charity. I figured you could help Maria with the household accounts, maybe take over some of the paperwork for the ranch. God knows I hate dealing with ledgers. You would be earning your keep." It was a transparent excuse, and they both knew it, but it was offered with enough dignity that Violet could accept without feeling like a beggar. "I am quite good with numbers," she said carefully. "Then we have an arrangement." They looked at each other across the kitchen, and something passed between them that neither could name. It felt like recognition, like two lost souls acknowledging each other's existence in the vast loneliness of the world. The trip to town happened that afternoon. Violet sat beside Xavier on the wagon bench, acutely aware of the strength in his hands as he handled the reins, the breadth of his shoulders, the way he squinted against the sun. She told herself firmly that noticing these things was dangerous, that she had no business thinking of any man that way, especially not now, especially not in her condition. Rawhide looked different in full daylight, less menacing and more simply tired. The buildings needed paint, the street needed grading, and half the people they passed looked as worn out as the town itself. But there was also a stubborn vitality to the place, a sense that these people had chosen to make a life in this unforgiving land and would not be easily defeated. Xavier helped her down from the wagon in front of the general store, his hands careful on her waist. The storekeeper, a thin man named Morrison, gave Violet a sharp look that she had learned to recognize. Judgment, speculation. But Xavier's presence seemed to create a protective barrier around her. "Miss Sutton is staying at the Circle X," Xavier said casually, as if that explained everything. "She will be helping with the ranch accounts. We need to get her set up with supplies." Morrison's expression shifted immediately. Xavier Cross was the richest man in the county, and his business was not to be dismissed. "Of course, Mr. Cross. Whatever the lady needs." They spent an hour in that store, and Xavier insisted on buying far more than Violet thought necessary. Fabric in soft colors for baby clothes, yarn for knitting, a new dress for Violet herself since her traveling clothes were worn thin, sturdy boots, a warm shawl for the coming winter. He added practical items too, soap and lotion, and a hairbrush with real boar bristles. When Violet protested, he just shook his head. "Consider it an advance on your wages," he said, and she could not argue with that logic, false though it was. As they loaded the purchases into the wagon, a woman approached them. She was perhaps 30, with auburn hair and a dress that was slightly too fine for Rawhide's dusty streets, her eyes fixed on Violet with undisguised curiosity. "Xavier, darling, you did not tell me you had a new house guest." Xavier's expression became carefully polite. "Catherine. I was not aware I needed to report my household arrangements to you." Catherine's laugh was brittle. "Of course not. I am simply surprised. You know how people talk. Let them talk." Catherine's gaze raked over Violet, lingering pointedly on her belly. "I am sure they will. Do introduce me to your friend. Miss Violet Sutton, this is Catherine Donovan. Her father owns the bank." "How lovely to meet you," Catherine said, in a tone that suggested it was anything but. "How long will you be staying at the Circle X?" Violet lifted her chin. "That has not been determined." "I see." Catherine turned back to Xavier. "Well, I do hope you will still attend the church social next week. I was so looking forward to dancing with you." "I will be there," Xavier said, though his voice lacked enthusiasm. Catherine smiled triumphantly, nodded to them both, and swept away. Violet watched her go, feeling an unexpected pang of something that might have been jealousy, which was ridiculous. Xavier Cross could dance with whomever he pleased. It was none of her concern. "Old friend?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Her father wants to merge our properties. Catherine has made it clear she would be amenable to the arrangement." Xavier's voice was dry. "I have made it equally clear I am not interested in a marriage based on land acquisition." They climbed back onto the wagon, and Xavier guided the horses toward the edge of town. But instead of heading straight back to the ranch, he took a different road, one that wound up into the foothills. "Where are we going?" Violet asked. "There is something I want to show you." They drove for another 20 minutes, climbing steadily until they reached a plateau that overlooked the entire valley. From here, Violet could see the town of Rawhide spread out below, the silver thread of the river that gave the region life, and beyond that, Xavier's ranch with its buildings and corrals and vast pastures dotted with cattle. The mountains rose up on all sides, purple and blue and gold in the afternoon light. "It is beautiful," Violet breathed. Xavier set the brake and turned to face her. "When I first came here, I had nothing. I worked for other ranchers, saved every penny, and finally bought 100 acres of worthless scrubland. Everyone said I was a fool, but I could see what this place could become. I built it from nothing, and now I have more than I ever dreamed of back in Virginia. Why are you telling me this?" He hesitated, as if gathering his courage. "Because I want you to know that where you come from does not matter out here. What matters is what you make of yourself, who you choose to be. Whatever happened to you before you came to Rawhide, it does not have to define you." Violet felt tears prick her eyes. "The world does not work that way, Mr. Cross. A woman in my condition, without a husband, I am ruined. My child will be called a bastard. Nothing I do can change that. Not in the eyes of small-minded people, maybe, but you can build a life here anyway. You can give your baby a home, a future. You can be more than what they say you are." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. But hope was a dangerous thing, and she had learned to guard her heart carefully. "We should get back," she said quietly. Xavier nodded and released the brake. They drove back to the ranch in silence, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who had said more than their words revealed, who were beginning to understand each other in ways that went deeper than conversation. That evening, after dinner, Violet sat in the parlor with her new fabric spread across her lap, beginning to cut out a pattern for a tiny gown. Maria sat across from her, mending shirts, and Xavier worked at his desk in the corner. going through papers with a furrowed brow. It was a domestic scene, peaceful and ordinary, and Violet felt something in her chest loosen slightly. "Xavier is no good with numbers," Maria said suddenly, breaking the silence. "He will add the same column 3 times and get 3 different answers. This is why his books are a disaster." Xavier looked up, affronted. "They are not a disaster. Last month you thought you lost $500. Turns out you just could not read your own handwriting." Violet could not help but smile. "I could look at them if you like. I kept books for my father's business for years." Xavier pushed the ledger across the desk toward her with perhaps more enthusiasm than was strictly necessary. "Please, I would be grateful." Violet set aside her sewing and moved to the desk. She spent the next hour going through his accounts, finding errors and making corrections, reorganizing his system into something more logical. Xavier watched her work, fascinated by the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the way she bit her lower lip when she was thinking. She had beautiful hands, long-fingered and graceful, and he found himself wondering what it would feel like to hold one of those hands in his own. "There," Violet said finally. "You actually made $600 more than you thought last month. You had recorded the same expense twice." Xavier leaned over her shoulder to look at her corrections. And suddenly, he was very aware of how close they were, close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she had used, could see the fine golden hairs at the nape of her neck. "You are a miracle worker," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. Violet turned her head and their faces were inches apart. For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with possibility. Then the baby kicked hard enough that Violet gasped and the moment broke. "Are you all right?" Xavier asked, stepping back quickly. "Yes, the baby is just very active tonight." She pressed a hand to her belly, and her expression softened in a way that made Xavier's heart clench. "Does it hurt?" "Sometimes. Mostly it just feels strange, like there is a whole other person living inside me." She paused, then added softly, "Which I suppose there is." "Are you frightened? About the birth, I mean." Violet met his eyes, and in them he saw a vulnerability she usually kept hidden. Terrified. "My mother died giving birth to my younger brother. I was 12. I remember everything." Xavier pulled up a chair and sat beside her, and without thinking about it, covered her hand with his. "Maria has delivered half the babies in this county. When your time comes, she will take care of you." "I promise." "You make a lot of promises, Xavier Cross." "I keep them too." They sat like that for a long moment, hands touching, eyes locked, while Maria pretended to focus very intently on her mending and smiled to herself. The days turned into weeks, and Violet settled into life at the Circle X with surprising ease. She took over the ranch accounts completely, bringing order to Xavier's chaotic record-keeping. She helped Maria with cooking and preserving, putting up vegetables and fruits for the winter. She sewed baby clothes and knitted tiny blankets, preparing for the life that would soon enter the world. And she fell in love with Xavier Cross, though she tried desperately not to. It was impossible not to love him, she discovered. He was kind without being patronizing, strong without being domineering. He treated his ranch hands fairly, paying them good wages and ensuring they had decent living conditions. He was patient with his horses and gentle with the ranch dogs. He read books in the evening, real literature that he borrowed from the traveling library that came through once a month. He had opinions about politics and art and philosophy, and he was willing to listen to hers even when they disagreed. He made her laugh, which was perhaps the most dangerous thing of all. One evening, he told her a story about trying to rope a particularly stubborn calf and ending up in the water trough himself, and she laughed so hard she got hiccups. He looked at her like she had given him a gift beyond price, and she realized that he loved making her happy. Xavier, for his part, was completely besotted and knew it. He had never expected to fall in love with a pregnant woman who was carrying another man's child, but the heart wanted what it wanted. He loved the way Violet hummed while she worked, the way she always had a book within reach, the way she talked to her unborn baby when she thought no one was listening. He loved her stubborn independence and the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. He loved the intelligence in her eyes and the strength in her spirit. He wanted to tell her. The words built up inside him until he felt like he might burst with them, but the timing never seemed right. She was vulnerable, dependent on his protection. He did not want her to feel obligated to return feelings she might not share. The church social arrived, and Xavier reluctantly prepared to attend. He had given his word to Catherine, and besides, it would look odd if he did not make an appearance. But he found himself wishing he could stay home with Violet instead, playing chess in the parlor or reading aloud to each other as they had done the previous evening. "You should go," Violet said, helping him with his tie. They were standing in the front hallway close together, and her fingers were deft on the fabric. "It would be rude not to." "Come with me," Xavier said impulsively. Violet's hand stilled. "I do not think that would be wise. People will talk. Let them talk. Easy for you to say. You are a man, a wealthy one. Your reputation can weather a little gossip. Mine cannot." Xavier caught her hands, holding them against his chest. "I do not care about your reputation or what those people think. I want you there with me, Xavier." His name was a sigh, a prayer, a warning. "What are we doing? This cannot end well." "Why not?" "Because I am carrying another man's child. Because I am living in your house with no claim to your name. Because eventually people will expect you to marry someone suitable, someone like Catherine Donovan, and where will that leave me?" Xavier pulled her closer until they were almost embracing. "I will never marry Catherine Donovan, and you have more claim to my name than anyone I have ever met. If you wanted it, that is." Violet's breath caught. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I am saying I love you, Violet Sutton. I am saying I want to marry you, want to give your baby my name, want to build a life with you. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I have never been more certain of anything." Tears spilled down Violet's cheeks. "You cannot want that. You do not know what you would be taking on." "I know exactly what I am taking on. A brilliant, beautiful, stubborn woman who is going to drive me crazy and make me happier than I have ever been. A child who needs a father, a future that finally makes sense." "The baby is not yours," Violet said, forcing the words out. "She will not be your blood." Xavier cupped her face in his hands, thumbs wiping away her tears. "She will be by morning." Violet stared at him, not understanding. "What?" "If you marry me tonight, right now, then by morning any baby born in this house will be mine. Legally, socially, in every way that matters, we will raise her together, love her together. She will be ours. You would do that. You would claim another man's child as your own." "I would claim you both as my own." Xavier's voice was fierce. "Marry me, Violet. Let me give you the life you deserve." Violet kissed him. She could not help herself. She rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, and Xavier responded immediately, gathering her carefully into his arms, mindful of her belly. The kiss was gentle and passionate and full of promise, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Yes," Violet whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Xavier let out a whoop of joy that brought Maria and Robert running from the kitchen. When they heard the news, Maria burst into tears and crushed Violet in a hug, while Robert shook Xavier's hand hard enough to bruise. "We need to get married tonight," Xavier said. "Is that possible?" Robert scratched his jaw. "Well, Preacher Thompson lives just outside town. If we ride fast, we could get there and back before midnight. Then let us ride." An hour later, Violet found herself standing in Preacher Thompson's small parlor, wearing the best dress Xavier had bought her, holding a bunch of wildflowers that Maria had quickly gathered from the garden. Xavier stood beside her in his Sunday suit, looking more nervous than she had ever seen him. The preacher's wife played a hymn on an out-of-tune piano, and Preacher Thompson read from his Bible with a slow, sonorous voice. "Do you, Xavier Daniel Cross, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do." Xavier's voice was steady and sure. "And do you, Violet Marie Sutton, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Violet looked into Xavier's gray eyes and saw her future there, saw safety and love and home. "I do." "Then, by the power vested in me by the state of Nevada, I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss your bride." Xavier kissed her sweetly, reverently, like she was something precious and fragile. When they broke apart, they were both smiling through tears. They rode back to the Circle X as husband and wife, and Xavier carried Violet over the threshold while Maria cried happy tears, and Robert pretended he had dust in his eye. They spent their wedding night in Xavier's room, which was now their room, lying together in the big bed with Violet's head on Xavier's chest and his arm around her shoulders, talking about their future until they fell asleep tangled together. By morning, everything had changed. The baby that had been fatherless was now Xavier Cross's daughter in every way that mattered. Violet, who had been ruined and alone, was now a respectable married woman. And Xavier, who had been successful but lonely, was now a husband and soon to be father. When they went into town the following week to register the marriage and handle legal matters, Catherine Donovan saw them walking together, saw the matching gold bands on their fingers, saw the way Xavier looked at his new wife like she hung the moon. Her face went white, then red, and she turned on her heel and stalked away without a word. "That could have gone worse," Xavier said mildly. Violet laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. "I suspect we will be the subject of considerable gossip." "Undoubtedly. Do you care?" "Not even a little bit." They stopped at the general store, where Morrison congratulated them with genuine warmth. "Fine woman you have got there, Mr. Cross, and just in time, too, from the looks of things." "Any day now," Xavier agreed, his hand finding the small of Violet's back. "You will want to stock up on supplies then. Babies need a powerful lot of things." They left the store with another wagon load of purchases, everything from baby blankets to a handmade cradle that Morrison had in the back room. Xavier insisted on buying all of it, delighting in his new role as provider. As they drove home, Violet said quietly, "I should tell you about the father, about what happened." Xavier glanced at her. "You do not owe me that story. I want you to know. I want no secrets between us." So she told him about Michael, the merchant's son who had courted her with poetry and promises, about how he had seduced her with talk of marriage and a future together, about how everything had changed the moment she told him she was pregnant, about the threats, the money, the demand that she leave town and never speak his name again. "I took the money because I had no choice," she finished. "I needed it to survive, to give the baby a chance, but I hated myself for it. I hated that he could buy his way out of responsibility while I had to carry the consequences." Xavier pulled the wagon to a stop. They were halfway between town and the ranch, alone on the empty road. He turned to face Violet fully. "Listen to me. You did what you had to do to survive, to protect your child. There is no shame in that. That man is a coward and a fool, and he lost something precious because he was too stupid to recognize it. But his loss is my gain, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful that you ended up here with me." Violet threw her arms around his neck, baby belly and all, and held on tight. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much it scares me. I love you too, and I am not going anywhere." They sat there on the wagon seat, holding each other, until one of Xavier's ranch hands rode past, and tactfully pretended not to see his boss kissing his wife on the public road. The baby came 3 weeks later, on a hot August afternoon when the sky was the color of bleached bone and the air shimmered with heat. Violet's water broke while she was helping Maria in the garden, and suddenly, the abstract concept of childbirth became terrifyingly real. Maria took charge immediately, getting Violet into the house and into bed, sending Robert to fetch the doctor from town, even though she was perfectly capable of handling the birth herself. Xavier hovered anxiously in the hallway until Maria chased him downstairs, telling him he was making Violet nervous. The labor lasted 14 hours. Xavier spent most of that time pacing the porch like a caged animal, smoking cigarette after cigarette even though he had quit months ago. He could hear Violet crying out upstairs, and every sound went through him like a knife. Robert sat with him, keeping him company in his vigil. "First baby takes a while," Robert said. "Maria was in labor for near 20 hours with our son. Worth every minute of waiting, though." Xavier had not known Robert and Maria had a child. "Where is your son now?" Robert's face clouded. "Died of fever when he was 6. That was 10 years ago. Still miss him every day. I am sorry. Life is hard out here. You take your happiness where you can find it, and you hold on tight while you have got it." Just before midnight, a new sound pierced the night air. A baby crying, strong and healthy and insistent. Xavier was up the stairs before he consciously decided to move, bursting into the bedroom to find Maria holding a small, red-faced bundle wrapped in a blanket. "You have a daughter," Maria said, beaming. "Strong lungs, healthy color. Perfect." But Xavier's eyes were on Violet, who lay exhausted against the pillows, her hair damp with sweat and her face pale. "Is she all right?" "I am fine," Violet said, though her voice was weak. "Just tired." Maria placed the baby in Violet's arms, and Xavier moved to the side of the bed, looking down at the tiny person who had just entered the world. She was impossibly small, with a dusting of dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right through him, even though he knew newborns could not focus yet. "She is beautiful," he breathed. "You want to hold her?" Violet asked. Xavier had never held a baby before, but he reached out with steady hands and gathered his daughter against his chest. She felt like she weighed nothing at all, fragile as spun glass and twice as precious. She made a small sound, almost like a question, and something in Xavier's heart shifted and settled into a new configuration. "Hello, little one," he murmured. "Welcome to the family. I am your papa, and I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you are safe and loved and happy." The baby yawned, revealing pink gums, and Violet laughed weakly. "I think she approves." "What should we name her?" Xavier asked, unable to take his eyes off his daughter's face. "I was thinking Emma. Emma Cross." "Emma," Xavier repeated, testing the name. "It is perfect." He carefully handed the baby back to Violet, who put her to breast with Maria's help. Xavier watched his wife and daughter together and felt a sense of completeness he had never known he was missing. This was what he had been building toward all along. Not just the ranch, not just the house. This family, this love. The doctor arrived an hour later, checked both mother and baby, and declared them both healthy. He looked at Xavier with something like respect. "You are a lucky man, Cross. Your wife is strong and your daughter is thriving." "I know," Xavier said simply. After the doctor left, after Maria and Robert had retired to their own quarters, Xavier sat in a chair beside the bed, watching Violet and Emma sleep. The lamp burned low, casting soft shadows across the room. Outside, the desert night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. He must have dozed off, because he woke to Emma crying. Violet stirred, reaching for the baby, but Xavier was faster. "I've got her," he said, lifting Emma from the cradle they had placed beside the bed. He walked with her, swaying gently, patting her back like he had seen Maria do. "Shh, sweet girl, Papa is here." Emma settled almost immediately, her small head resting against his shoulder. Xavier felt a fierce surge of protectiveness so strong it almost brought him to his knees. This child, who shared none of his blood, was his in every way that mattered. He would die for her without hesitation. He would kill for her if necessary. She was his daughter. "You are going to spoil her," Violet said sleepily from the bed, but she was smiling. "That is my job," Xavier replied, still swaying with Emma. "Your job is to keep her grounded. Between the two of us, she will turn out just fine." The summer turned to fall and fall to winter. Emma grew from a tiny newborn into a chubby, bright-eyed baby who smiled at everyone and everything. She had Violet's green eyes and her birth father's dark hair, but her temperament was all sunshine. She laughed easily and cried rarely, content to be passed between her parents and Maria and Robert, soaking up love like a sponge. Violet bloomed in her role as wife and mother. The haunted look left her eyes, replaced by contentment and joy. She ran the ranch's accounts with effortless efficiency, freeing Xavier to focus on expanding the herd and improving the property. In the evenings, they sat together in the parlor, Violet with her sewing or a book, Xavier playing with Emma on a blanket on the floor, and they talked about everything and nothing. They made love for the first time 3 months after Emma was born, and it was gentle and passionate and full of the intimacy that came from truly knowing each other. Afterward, lying tangled together in their big bed, Xavier traced patterns on Violet's bare shoulder. "I want more children," he said. "A whole houseful if you are willing." Violet smiled against his chest. "I think I could be persuaded, though maybe we could wait a bit. Emma is rather demanding. Fair enough, we have time." But time had other plans. Violet discovered she was pregnant again the following spring, and this time there was no question about the baby's parentage. Xavier was ridiculously proud, strutting around like a rooster, telling anyone who would listen that he was going to be a father again. "You are already a father," Violet reminded him, amused. "I know. But this time I get to be here from the beginning. I get to feel the baby kick, watch you grow round with my child. It is different." Violet understood what he meant. This pregnancy was joyful in a way her first had not been. There was no fear, no shame, no uncertainty. Just excitement and love and anticipation. Their son was born in January of 1879, during a cold snap that left frost on the windows and snow dusting the mountains. The labor was shorter this time, only 8 hours, and the baby came out wailing his displeasure at the cold world. "He has got your temper," Violet said, laughing and crying at the same time as Maria placed the baby in her arms. Xavier looked at his son, red-faced and furious, and fell in love all over again. "He is perfect." They named him Thomas after Xavier's father and called him Tommy. Emma, now almost 2 years old, was fascinated by her baby brother. She would pat his head gently and bring him her toys, trying to share even though he was too young to play. "Good sister," she would say proudly, and Xavier and Violet would exchange glances over her head, their hearts full to bursting. The years rolled by with the steady inevitability of the seasons. Tommy grew from a colicky infant into a rambunctious toddler who seemed determined to give his parents gray hair before they turned 35. Emma started helping with the ranch chores, learning to collect eggs and feed the chickens, trailing after Xavier like a devoted shadow. When Emma was 4 and Tommy was 2, Violet became pregnant again. This time she carried twins, a fact they did not discover until Maria's experienced hands detected 2 distinct heartbeats. "Twins run in families," Violet said faintly, trying to process the news. "My grandmother was a twin." Xavier was delighted. "A house full of children, just like I wanted." The twins, both girls, were born in September of 1881. They named them Clara and Catherine, though they quickly became Clary and Kate to avoid confusion. They were identical, with Xavier's gray eyes and Violet's dark blonde hair, and from the moment they could crawl, they moved as a unit, always together, communicating in a language only they understood. The house that had once seemed too big was now filled with noise and laughter and the constant chaos of 4 children. Xavier expanded the house, adding more bedrooms and a larger kitchen, and hired additional help for Maria because keeping up with 4 children and a working ranch was too much for one woman. Emma, as the oldest, became fiercely protective of her siblings. She was 8 years old when she overheard some of the town children whispering that she did not look like her father, that maybe she was not really a Cross. She had marched up to the ringleader, a boy 2 years older than her, and punched him in the nose. Xavier was called into town to deal with the aftermath. He sat with Emma on the steps of the general store while Violet apologized to the boy's mother inside. "You cannot go around hitting people," Xavier said, though his heart was not in the lecture. He said, "I was not your real daughter." Emma's voice was small, uncertain in a way that broke Xavier's heart. Xavier pulled her onto his lap, even though she was really getting too big for it. "Listen to me very carefully, Emma Rose Cross. You are my real daughter in every single way that matters. I chose you. Before you were even born, I chose to be your papa, and I have never regretted that choice for 1 second. You understand me, but we do not look alike. So what? Tommy has my eyes, but he has your mama's stubbornness. The twins look like both of us mixed together. Families are not about looking the same. They are about loving each other, taking care of each other, being there for each other no matter what." Emma wrapped her arms around his neck. "I love you, Papa. I love you too, sweetheart, more than all the stars in the sky. That is a lot. It is not nearly enough." They sat there for a while longer, father and daughter, while inside the store Violet smoothed things over with the other mother. When they finally went home, Emma sat between her parents on the wagon seat, and they sang silly songs all the way back to the ranch. That evening, after the children were in bed, Violet and Xavier sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Do you ever regret it?" Violet asked quietly. "Taking us in? Taking on someone else's child?" Xavier pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Not for one single moment. Emma is mine. They are all mine. This life is mine, and I am the luckiest man alive because of it." "I love you," Violet said, for perhaps the 1,000th time since they had married. "I love you too," Xavier replied, for perhaps the 10,000th time, because he never tired of saying it. The ranch prospered over the years. Xavier's careful management and Violet's brilliant financial mind turned the Circle X into one of the most successful operations in Nevada. They bought adjacent properties, expanded the herd, and built a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. Other ranchers came to Xavier for advice, and he gave it freely, believing that a rising tide lifted all boats. Emma grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's intelligence and her father's determination. She went to school in San Francisco for 2 years, studying literature and mathematics, but she came home to the ranch because her heart was there, in the wide open spaces and the work that needed doing. Tommy became a talented horseman, able to break and train even the most stubborn mounts. He was quieter than his sisters, thoughtful and observant, but when he spoke, people listened because he always had something worth saying. The twins were inseparable and incorrigible, always plotting some mischief or another. They kept the entire household on their toes, but they were also fiercely loving and loyal, ready to defend any member of their family at a moment's notice. In 1889, when Emma was 12, Tommy was 10, and the twins were 8, Violet discovered she was pregnant once more. She was 35 years old, and the pregnancy was harder than the others had been. She tired easily, and her back ached constantly, and the baby sat so heavy that she could barely walk in the final months. Xavier hovered over her constantly, driving her crazy with his concern. But she loved him for it, loved that after 12 years of marriage, he still treated her like she was precious. The baby, another son, was born in May of 1890. The labor was long and difficult, and for several terrifying hours, Xavier thought he might lose both wife and child. But Maria was a skilled midwife, and the doctor they had summoned from Reno knew his business. Mother and son both survived, exhausted but healthy. They named him James, after no one in particular, because they simply liked the name. He was a calm baby, content to observe the world with solemn dark eyes, and from the beginning, he was clearly the favorite of all his siblings. "We are done now," Violet told Xavier firmly when James was 6 months old. "5 children is plenty." "Whatever you say, my love," Xavier agreed, secretly relieved because watching her go through that last pregnancy had taken years off his life. He was 40 years old, Violet was 36, and they had 5 healthy children and a thriving ranch. They had love and friendship, and a community that had come to respect them despite the unconventional start to their marriage. They had everything they could possibly want. The children grew, as children do. Emma fell in love with a young rancher named John Miller, who worked for one of their neighbors. Xavier liked him immediately, and when John came to ask permission to court Emma, Xavier gave it gladly. They married when Emma was 19, in a ceremony held at the Circle X with half the county in attendance. Xavier walked his oldest daughter down the aisle, or rather across the yard to where the preacher waited under a bower of flowers, and when he placed her hand in John's, he whispered, "You take care of my girl." "With my life," John promised, and he meant it. Tommy announced at 18 that he wanted to try his hand at horse trading, traveling to different ranches and buying and selling stock. Xavier was hesitant, but Violet encouraged him to let their son find his own way. Tommy left the ranch with their blessing and a stake of money to get him started, and he thrived. He sent letters regularly, full of stories about his travels and the people he met. The twins stayed close to home, helping with the ranch work and scandalizing the town with their independent ways. They learned to rope and brand alongside the male ranch hands, and they could outshoot most of the men in the county. Xavier worried about them finding husbands, but Violet just laughed. "They will find love when they are ready. And any man lucky enough to win one of them will have to be strong enough to match them. It will happen in its own time." And it did. Clary fell in love with a schoolteacher who came to Rawhide in 1895, a quiet man with a gentle smile who was not the least bit intimidated by her sharp tongue and sharper shooting. They married a year later. Kate took longer, but eventually, she met a traveling journalist who was writing a book about the changing West. They courted through letters for 2 years before he came back to Nevada and asked for her hand. She married him in 1898, and they moved to San Francisco, where she wrote articles for newspapers about women's rights and the new century coming. James, the baby, grew into a serious young man who loved books and learning. He talked about going back east to attend university, and Xavier and Violet encouraged him, even though it meant their youngest would be far from home. In 1905, Xavier and Violet celebrated their 28th wedding anniversary. They were in their 50s now, graying and slowing down but still sharp-minded and strong. The ranch was everything they had dreamed of, and their children were happy and settled in their own lives. They sat on the porch one evening in late summer, watching the sun set over the mountains, and Violet leaned her head on Xavier's shoulder. "You remember that first day?" she asked. "When I got off the stagecoach and you offered to help with my bag. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, even exhausted and dusty and obviously terrified. I was terrified. I had no idea what I was going to do, how I was going to survive, and then you appeared like something out of a story. I did not feel heroic. I felt like an idiot offering a room to a pregnant stranger. Robert thought I was crazy." Violet laughed. "You were a little bit crazy, but it was the best kind of crazy. You told me that night that the baby was not mine," Xavier said, remembering, "and I told you she would be by morning. And she was. Emma was yours from the moment we said our vows. She has always been yours." "All of you have always been mine," Xavier said, pulling her closer. "You and every one of our children, the family we built together. It has been the greatest adventure of my life." "Mine too," Violet whispered. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear one by one, until the whole sky was ablaze with them. Inside the house, which had been so empty when Xavier first built it, there was life and light. Robert and Maria were in the kitchen, arguing amiably about something. A few ranch hands were playing cards in the bunkhouse. Emma and John lived just over the rise with their 3 children, close enough to visit daily. Tommy was due home for a visit next week. The twins wrote regular letters full of their adventures. The Circle X Ranch would continue for generations, passed down through the family, a legacy built on love and hard work and the courage to take a chance on a stranger. And it all started with a dusty stagecoach stop, a desperate woman with a secret, and a cowboy who saw past her circumstances to the person she truly was. Years later, when Emma's oldest daughter asked her grandmother about how she and Grandpa Xavier had met, Violet would smile and tell the story. About the stagecoach and the offer of help, about the quick wedding and the baby born soon after, about love growing slowly but surely like grass in the desert, stubborn and strong and impossible to kill. "But Grandpa was not your real father?" the girl would ask, confused. And Emma, with her gray eyes so like Xavier's and her absolute certainty, would say firmly, "He was the only real father I ever knew. Blood does not make family. Love does." And that was the truth that the Cross family carried forward generation after generation. The truth that Xavier and Violet had learned in those first precious days of their marriage, when they chose each other despite all the obstacles, despite what society said, despite the complications of their situation. Love made family. Love built homes. Love created futures. And their love, born in the dust and heat of a Nevada summer in 1877, had created something beautiful that would last long after they were gone. Xavier Cross died peacefully in his sleep in 1912, at the age of 62. He was surrounded by his family, in the house he had built with his own hands, on the land he had carved out of wilderness. His last words were to Violet, who sat beside him holding his hand. "Thank you," he whispered, "for choosing me, for giving me everything." "I love you," she replied, tears streaming down her face. "I have loved you every single day since you offered to help a desperate woman with her bag." He smiled, squeezed her hand once more, and slipped away. Violet lived another 8 years, staying on the ranch that was now run by Emma and John, spoiling her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, writing letters to her far-flung family. She passed in 1920, on a spring morning when the desert was in bloom, surrounded by flowers and love. They buried her next to Xavier, on the hill overlooking the ranch, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. And on their shared headstone, their children had these words carved: Xavier Cross, 1850–1912, Violet Cross, 1854–1920. Beloved husband and wife, devoted parents and grandparents, they built a family with love. The Circle X Ranch thrived for another 50 years, before eventually being sold out of the family in the 1960s. But the story of Xavier and Violet lived on, passed down through generations, a reminder that family is not always about blood. Sometimes it is about choice. Sometimes it is about a cowboy who saw a woman in need and offered help without judgment. Sometimes it is about a woman brave enough to accept that help and build a new life. Sometimes it is about a baby who was not born his, but became his by mourning, through the simple act of saying vows and meaning them. Through the profound act of choosing love over convention, choosing family over biology, choosing each other over all the voices saying it could not work. Emma lived to be 91 years old, long enough to see the ranch sold and Nevada change from frontier territory to modern state. But she never forgot those early days, never forgot the way her papa had looked at her mother with such devotion, never forgot feeling completely and utterly loved despite the circumstances of her birth. On her own deathbed, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren, she told the story one more time. "My mother got off a stagecoach in the middle of nowhere, pregnant and alone and terrified. And my father, who had never met her before that day, offered her everything he had. He gave her his name, his home, his heart. He gave me a father when I had none. He taught me that love is a choice you make every single day, not just a feeling that happens to you." Her youngest great-granddaughter, a girl of 16 with Emma's green eyes and Xavier's stubborn chin, asked, "But was not it hard, being the oldest, knowing your birth father was someone else?" Emma smiled. "The man who gave me life was a stranger I never met. The man who raised me, who taught me to ride and read and stand up for what was right, who walked me down the aisle at my wedding and held my children when they were born, that man was my father. That man was Xavier Cross. And I was his daughter, completely and totally, from the moment he claimed me as such." She closed her eyes, still smiling, and joined her parents in whatever comes after this life. And the story lived on. The story of a love that conquered circumstance, of a family built by choice rather than chance, of a cowboy and a desperate woman who found each other in the vast Nevada desert and created something that would outlast them both. The house still stands, converted now into a museum dedicated to Nevada ranch life in the late 1800s. Visitors walk through the rooms where Xavier and Violet raised their children, where love and laughter once filled every corner. They see the desk where Violet kept the ranch accounts, the chair where Xavier sat reading to his children in the evenings, the bedroom where 5 babies were born, and 2 devoted partners spent 28 years of nights together. And sometimes, in the late afternoon when the light slants golden through the windows, visitors swear they can feel something in that house, something warm and welcoming, something that feels like coming home. Maybe it is just imagination. Or maybe it is the echo of a love so strong it left an imprint on the very walls, a reminder that the best stories are the ones where people choose each other, where love triumphs over adversity, where family is what you make it rather than what you are born into. The story of Xavier and Violet Cross, of Emma who was his by morning, of a family built on faith and choice and unshakable devotion, remains as true now as it was then. Love makes family. Courage builds futures. And sometimes, the best thing you can do is offer help to a stranger, because you never know when that stranger might become the most important person in your life. In the desert heat of Nevada, on land that has seen 1,000 sunsets, the legacy of the Circle X Ranch lives on. Not in the cattle or the property or the buildings, but in the descendants of Xavier and Violet Cross, scattered across the country, carrying forward the lesson their ancestors learned in that first difficult, beautiful year. Family is not about blood. It is about showing up. It is about keeping promises. It is about saying, "She will be mine by morning," and meaning it with every fiber of your being. It is about building a life together one day at a time, through hardship and joy, through births and deaths, through all the ordinary and extraordinary moments that make up a marriage. And in the end, that is all any of us can hope for. To love and be loved. To build something lasting. To leave the world a little better than we found it. Xavier and Violet Cross did all that and more, and their story stands as a testament to the power of choosing love, no matter what the circumstances, no matter what the world says. The sun sets over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold and purple. The mountains stand eternal, witness to countless human stories, countless moments of heartbreak and triumph. And somewhere in that vast landscape, if you listen carefully, you might hear the echo of a promise made more than a century ago. "This baby is not yours," she warned him. "She will be by morning," the cowboy replied. And she was, and they all lived happily ever after, in a house built with love on land carved from wilderness, under the endless western sky.